Living in survival is living in stress. And stress is when your body's knocked out of homeostasis. Stress is when your body's knocked out of balance. The stress response is what our body naturally does to return itself back to order. Now we have different types of stresses. We have physical stresses like accidents or injuries or traumas or falls. We have chemical stresses like viruses and bacteria and hangovers and blood sugar levels and hormones and foods. And we have emotional stresses like traffic jams and internet connections and second mortgages and single parenting and 401ks. In every one of those things, physical, chemical, or emotional, the body responds by turning on a primitive nervous system. And that primitive nervous system is called the fight or flight nervous system. And when we are experiencing a threat in our external environment, we mobilize an enormous amount of energy to protect the body in its external environment. Now, those hormones of stress, those chemicals, produce a rush of energy. And that rush of energy wakes us up to be more present with three things. We become focused on our bodies, we become focused on the environment, and we become focused on time. Now, all organisms in nature can handle short-term stress. Zebra gets chased by a lion, 15 minutes goes back to grazing, and the body returns back to balance. But human beings are a little different. When we turn on the stress response, we can turn it on by thought alone. We can begin to think about some future event. We can begin to anticipate some worst case scenario. We can begin to expect something to happen in our future based on our past. And we make thought more real than anything else, and the body physiologically changes as if that future event is happening, and we experience the stress of that future event. By the same means, we can unfold the past bitter memory that's tattooed in the recesses of our gray matter, and like magic, it comes to life. And in that moment, it's real. And the body, as the unconscious mind, does not know the difference between the actual experience that produces the emotions and the emotions that we fabricate by thought alone. So, the hormones of stress then begin to push the genetic buttons that create disease. It's a scientific fact. And no organism in nature is designed for long-term stress. So, when you and I are living under the gun of the fight or flight nervous system, we're mobilizing all of this energy. The rush of energy becomes highly addictive. And we begin to subconsciously or unconsciously associate the problems and the conditions in our life to reaffirm our emotional addiction so that we can remember who we think we are as a somebody. So we keep the problems and the circumstances in our life to reaffirm how we want to feel based on that emotion. Now, the emotions of anger, of hatred, of aggression, of competition, of control, of fear, of anxiety, of guilt, of shame, of insecurity, of unworthiness, of fear, all of those emotions are the emotions driven by the hormones of stress. And those emotions then cause the ego to become selfish, become self-indulgent, self-centered, self-serving, self-aggrandizing. It's all about the self. Now, when the zebra's being chased by the lion, she's only concerned about three things. I got to take care of this body. Where in my environment am I going to run, and how much time do I have to get there? So the body, the environment, and time. And when you and I live by those lower emotions that I just talked about, we begin to identify ourselves as a body in this environment and time. We're concerned about our bodies, what we look like, what our faces look like, our wardrobe, the things that we have in our life, the things we don't own, our problems. We obsess about time. We become over-focused on these things. And in a sense, when those hormones of stress are running, we become materialists. We begin to try to define reality through our senses. Now, this is where we become more matter and less energy, because we become materialists, and if the atom is 99.99999% energy and possibility, we're focusing on the particle, the 0.00001% of reality, and we're missing out on a lot of potentials. Quantum physics says that your subjective mind has an effect on the objective world, that mind and matter are correlated, they're commingled. But if you're trying to change your life by the emotions of survival, you're functioning as more matter and less mind, so you have no control or dominion over anything in your life because you're vibrating at the same frequency of matter.
Frequency.
So you exert very little influence on the outcome. So now when you and I are in the creative state, when you and I are truly focused in creating, this amazing thing happens. We forget about ourselves.
Yes.
We become nobody, no thing, no time. We become pure consciousness. We become pure mind. And that's the moment we walk through the door to the quantum field. We no longer are focusing on the particle. Now we're focusing on possibility. And when an observer takes its attention off the particle, it turns into energy and information. So if you and I are observing our life from the same level of mind every single day, we keep infinite patterns of information collapsed into the same reality called our life. So then in order for you to change your body, something on your body, change something in your environment, or change some future time, you have to forget about your body. You have to forget about your environment. You have to forget about time. You have to become selfless. So going from selfish to selfless means we have to lay down the very thing we used our whole life to get what we want for something greater to happen. And that requires then dissociating and disconnecting from our environment, our body, and time. And it requires then taking our attention off the emotions that reaffirm the addiction that keeps us human. Well, the people who, you can always tell a person who is struggling with those emotions because they'll only talk about themselves. It's never about you.
That's
right. They can't think greater than how they feel. As a matter of fact, feelings become the means of thinking. And what they don't know that they're doing is they're creating a thought that produces an emotion that's addictive that causes them to think equal to how they feel, and they create a state of being. Now, it's a scientific fact that the chemicals of stress dysregulate and downregulate genes and create disease. Now, if you know that we can turn on the stress response just by thought alone, it means then our thoughts can make us sick. So the question is, if our thoughts can make us sick, can our thoughts make us well? Because according to the quantum model of reality, all disease is a lowering of frequency.
Yes.
When you begin to elevate your frequency, your body becomes more energy and less matter. You become more wave and less particle. And you excite photons into the state where you begin to broadcast new information. But so I think that most people then, they try to create a new personal reality as the same personality. Mm-hmm. You can't do it.
Can't do it.
You literally have to become somebody else. So the new science of neuroplasticity and epigenetics says that we're not hardwired to be a certain way the rest of our lives, and we're not doomed by our genes, that we're marvels of change. But if you're thinking the same thoughts, I mean, think about this. The average person thinks about 60 to 70,000 thoughts in one day. Out of those 60 to 70,000 thoughts, and 90% of them are the same thoughts as the day before.
Yep.
Same behavior creates the same experience. The same experience produces the same emotion, and that same emotion inspires the same thought, and we call that a personality. So by the time we're 35 years old, our biology becomes equal to how we think, how we act, and how we feel. So we fire and wire the same circuits in our brain, they become hardwired. We execute the same behaviors, we reaffirm those circuits. Those behaviors create the same experiences that produce the same emotions, and that becomes familiar to us. So then when a person has to cross the river of change, from the old self to the new self, the moment they start making a change, and the hardest part about change is not making the same choices you did the day before, all of a sudden they don't feel like themselves any longer. And you know what they do? They return back to the same choice so they can feel the same way, because God forbid they don't know who they are. But don't you think, though, that most people wait for crisis or trauma or disease or
Unfortunately,
diagnosis?
that is the fate of the human condition.
We reach our lowest denominator to decide to change.
Yes.
And my message is, why wait? You can learn and change in a state of pain and suffering, or you can learn and change in a state of joy and inspiration. It's a choice. I think that we view our life through the lens of the past.
Yes.
That the brain is a reflection of everything you've experienced in your life. So the brain is an artifact from your past. And emotions and feelings are the end product of past experiences. And so people live by certain emotions that define them. You know, whether it's suffering or victimization or aggression or anger or judgment, that's kind of the state of being that they've become accustomed to. So we could say then the emotion then becomes the lens that they view reality through. So then if you're thinking certain thoughts that create certain feelings, and those feelings are driving the same thoughts, then in a sense you're conditioning your body and mind to live in the past.
Yes.
And you cannot create a new future
Absolutely.
holding on to the emotions of the past. So this is where people begin to look at themselves for the first time and say, are these thoughts really serving me? Are these behaviors and habits that I'm demonstrating really part of my future? And are these emotions affecting anybody else but me? I'm the one I'm pushing my own genetic buttons. You know? So you can blame the person, you can blame the condition in your past, but in the end, you still have to transmute that emotion into wisdom, because a memory without the emotional charge is called wisdom, and that's the name of the game here. So until we forget about the event, just look at the emotion that you're living by and look to see if that emotion is part of your future. And if it isn't, then you have the choice to leave it, because a wealthy person, an abundant person, would never think lacking thoughts.